So welcome to this Interop.io webinar titled FDC3 for the Web in Action. We're going to be covering the new FDC3 release with a particular focus on the FDC3 for the Web facility and provide a bit of background about FDC3 and about Interop.io. So thank you very much for joining. I'm Leslie Spiro. I'm CEO and co-founder of Interop.io, and I'm joined by Juliana Langston, who is a senior software engineer here at Interop.io. But maybe more importantly for what we're talking about today, she's one of the maintainers of the FDC3 project. So we're going to cover a bit of background on FDC3, I've said FDC3 for the web, and then the heart of this will be a demo by Juliana showing how to make use of FDC3 and what difference it makes to your applications when you use FDC3 for the web to access the API. And in particular, how it lets you write a single application that can run both in a browser without any FDC3, but also in browsers with FDC3 and desktop containers with the same image, which I think opens up a lot of options when we start producing interop-enabled applications. Also kind of give a shout out to some in-person events that are coming up, and then have a Q&A. So for those of you who are not sure, there is a Q&A tool available in there's a Q&A tool available in Zoom, and if you type in your questions, we'll see them. If they apply to the current screen, we might stop and take those questions. Otherwise, we've allowed time at the end to go through the questions that you might ask. So FDC3 stands for Financial Desktop Connectivity and Collaboration Consortium. Bit of a mouthful, which is why we talk about FDC3. What is it? It's an open standard, it says here, for developers. We say in the initial kind of thing for financial applications, but actually there's nothing in FDC3 that's particularly about finance. It's about interop. FDC3 is an open source standard, and it's run within the Finos Foundation, which is a foundation dedicated to making open source available within the financial community. And it was introduced to the FDC3 was introduced to an open source thing when Finos was part of the Symphony Foundation by a competitor of ours, OpenFin. But I mean, I joined on the first meeting. I've been involved in this since day one because I think it's really important. And Finos then moved from Symphony, that software foundation, to Linux Foundation. So the Linux Foundation, major part of the open source infrastructure. They own and manage the Linux operating system or Linux kernel, and they have fantastically well thought out governance principles, which make sure that FDC3 is open to participation for everybody. You don't need to join Finos to take part in FDC3. You can just turn up, but there's lots of reasons why joining Finos is a really positive thing to do. But also, most importantly, who runs FDC3? And the answer is people who turn up and participate. So Juliana turns up to all the meetings, she involves in discussions, looking at code reviews and stuff like that, and that makes her part of FDC3. Not because she's employed by Interop.io, but because that's what she does. And so I'd encourage all of you to attend FDC3 meetings if this is of interest to you and participate. There are a number of different subgroups looking at use cases, and security is a big thing we're talking about now. So thoroughly recommend you joining, or request you join, really. One important point to make about FDC3 is that primarily it's a standard. It's a set of APIs, specification, and there's no code for production published by the FDC3 project until last month. So the FDC3 to the web is the first bit of production source code, open source, that FDC3 publish, and we think it's important to just kind of put that into a context, which is what we're trying to do here. So FDC3, I'm not going to go through it in detail, but it contains a couple of bits. It has context data, really important about how you define and describe things like an instrument or a counterparty or something like that. We're trying to use common definitions shared between different vendors and different applications so that stuff can work together. And the phrase in FDC3 is without prior notification. If we all follow the standard about how we describe an instrument, we can all use that same data. Now, we understand that for symbology reasons, there might be four or five or six different symbologies in use, and the context data defined for an instrument allows you to specify whether you've got Bloomberg Terminal, BPOD, Reuters, exchange ticker, whatever. So there's some understanding of the domain that we actually work in. Intents and the ability to execute methods, channels, color channels, or whatever. I mean, and this represents the baseline of interop. And I first came across interop literally 30 years ago. I was working for Reuters, where they had the first Windows workstations. And then we heard about this magical thing called the Bloomberg Terminal, and it was magic. So at Reuters, we were delivering individual applications running on Windows 2, I think, at the time. And each of those things was separate. And then we heard about this Bloomberg Terminal, which was magic. You could be in one application and you clicked on an instrument, and then these other applications updated. And then we understood what it was, and somebody at Reuters, someone called Ian Koenig, specified something called RACE, Reuters Application Collaboration Environment, which was making use of OLE and COM, although it wasn't called COM at the time. And I wrote the first implementation of that, and then pretty much my career, the various products that I've been involved in, have always had some interop. And it's really exciting to see this become a core standard and more companies committing to this kind of level of interop. FTC3 for the web I've mentioned several times, and it's new. And the way we're looking for a metaphor to describe what it does, and the metaphor we've come up with is a key to a door. So in this kind of metaphor, each of these doors represent an environment your application might run in. It might be a standard browser, it might be io.Connect browser, it could be io.Connect desktop, it could be another desktop implementation from another vendor. And there are lots of them out there. There are commercial vendors like ourselves, and then there are a lot of companies are starting to produce internal versions of their containers, and some major vendors are also FTC3 enabling their containers. And when in that mode, as of before FTC3 for the web, you had to make each of your applications. Your application had to decide which environment it was going to run in, and then load all an FTC3 library of the right sort, or else wait for one to be injected. And it was all a bit confusing. So if you're writing an application that could run in multiple environments, the easiest thing actually was to ignore FTC3. So with FTC3 for the web, we might try and position it as a universal key. You'll notice how in our image here, each door gets the same kind of keyhole. And the idea is that you include FTC3 for the web, and your application can make use of FTC3, however, it's whatever environment you're running in, including no environment at all. And I think that makes it much easier for anybody to include FTC3 without knowing where they're going to be running. And that's why we think it's so important. It makes it much easier for people, application vendors, and in-house, if you have lots of different environments. If you're in a big organization, you might have several environments, to have basic interop there. I keep talking about FTC3 with its intents and channels as interop. Actually, it represents the baseline for what we do. I mean, we at io.Connect, we have at Interop.io, we have the io.Connect desktop, the io.Connect browser, and other products, and it's a platform. And so FTC3 is an important part of that functionality, but there's a lot more to it. We have workspaces, which is bringing together applications from Windows from lots of different applications into maybe a dedicated space to get a particular job done. Important part of what we do. And FTC3 is not really involved with window management. As part of window management, you also support layouts, putting your windows in different places. And then, as you move from your desktop to your laptop, or you move your, we all have laptops now, right? When you move from your laptop from your desk to at home, where you may only have one or two screens, the layouts adjust. An app launcher, how are you going to launch applications? Maybe you want your users to be looking at something that looks like a terminal with a toolbar at the top. Maybe you want an app launch as a floating toolbar, like a docking window. That's an important part of a platform, again, not covered by FTC3. And most of FTC3 is focused on JavaScript web applications. There is support for .NET, Java, Go has recently been added, but the main focus, I think, realistically is on JavaScript. But managing native applications and managing the windows of those native applications, really important part of what we do to provide a coherent user experience. And then there's lots more app adapters, Office, Bloomberg, Icon, whatever you have to be using, intents, observability, notifications. So yeah, the platform FTC3 remains a really important part, and just support that. You can run in any environment. That's a great thing. We'll take advantage of it. And then these other things that may be relevant to you. So just a kind of quick note on what Juliana's going to be doing. She's going to be running her sample application, the demo application in io.Connect browser in our sandbox. So Interop.io has an FTC3 sandbox you can connect to in your browser. And then when you run applications within that environment, you're able to make use of Interop.io for doing save layouts and also FTC3. So it's a great way to start playing with the FTC3 API. And we have some demo applications there. And one of the things that you'll get after this webinar is a link to the repository for the demo app. So you've got a way to head start your playing with the FTC3 application. So with that, happy to hand over to Juliana.
Okay. So welcome everyone, and I am excited to tell you all about FDC3 and how to integrate it into applications. I'm a front-end developer, and I've been working in development for 15 years. And specifically, I want to show you a complex application. Apparently, my dog has just now appeared. I want to show you a complex existing application that we can integrate FDC3 into. Sometimes you are starting with an application fresh, knowing that FDC3 is going to be there and you can build it in from the beginning. But normally what we see is existing, possibly legacy applications that you want to add FDC3 to over time. So I'm going to start here with something we've probably all seen, AG Grid. I just went ahead and grabbed one of their custom templates off from the internet, and I'm going to show you the code that's used there, which is already complicated enough, and then just a little bit of stuff that we can add to bring in FDC3. One of those little things I've added is just this note up here at the top left to tell me personally as a developer whether or not FDC3 works and is in part of this environment. So FDC3 only works if you have what we call a desktop agent working as a container that holds these different applications, and it can facilitate that FDC3 communication. One of the great things about FDC3 for the web, which was the big initiative of last year, is that desktop agent doesn't just have to be on the desktop anymore. It's now on the browser, or the browser agent, if you will. So because I've just opened this AG Grid template in a normal browser, by itself, no browser agent involved, we can see the strike through indicating that there is no FDC3. So let's go ahead and get ourselves a browser agent. I'm going to come over here to the io.Connect sandbox, which is the io.Connect browser product. And here you can add applications. It supports FDC3 out of the box, but also it supports workspace management, styling, and of course, the most important thing to me that you've already seen me apply, night themes. You can always turn on day themes, but I live my lifestyle night themed. And here within the sandbox environment, I've gone ahead and opened AG Grid. And as you can see here, FDC3 does not have that strike through. That is how we know that the browser agent is available and working for all of this. Now, let's just do a basic thing. One of the most common things people like to reach for in FDC3 are intents. So that's saying I want one particular application to send a message to one other application, one-to-one. So I can do that here. I'm going to double click on this, and what happens is an intent resolver comes up. This means that multiple applications can handle that intent, but it has to go to one application. So I, the user, can choose this. There's lots of stuff we can do if you want to control this workflow, control where that information goes to. We have lots of support both within the FDC3 standard and also just extra stuff within io.Connect browser. But for here, this is just what you would expect a normal default interaction to be, the intent resolver. So I'm going to say, let's send that information to a chart. and then a chart is popping up here with TradingView. And it does not know what I was talking about because I sent it a bond. Fine. Stock, we'll send it the stock information now. Actually, we'll just send it to the existing application. And so it updates now with an actual stock. So this is how intents work. And this is sort of that magic of being able to send information from one place to another without AG Grid necessarily caring what TradingView is. So how exactly do we do that? Let's take a look at some code right quick. So this right here is a lot of stuff that comes from AG Grid, a lot of information around how to get all of that application working. So let's pick out the couple of pieces in this complex application that only work with FDC3. So first of all, I'm importing this line right here. So we got a type so that your TypeScript can look a little bit nicer and get the right look aheads. But specifically, we are importing the get agent function from @finos/FDC3. This is what Finos is officially releasing, and it's the public repo that's working. You don't have to worry about which particular vendor is releasing anything. It is Finos that releases this. So we have get agent, and then what we just do is at some point we call await get agent, and that is all you have to do to enable FDC3 within an application. If you've ever worked with an application before with ever doing FDC3, typically what you're going to do is write window.fdc3.something, .broadcast, .raise intent, etc. And window.fdc3 is what you were calling because you were on a desktop and the FDC3 library had to be injected into your application by by whatever your desktop agent was. And because you were doing that, because we were adding this extra object to the global environment, you would get these very judgmental, I might say, red squiggles underneath the window.fdc3. This would also cause me problems when I'm trying to write automated test cases, and then Jess would tell you, no, we don't know what that is. And then you have to go through and add all these extra TypeScripts. It's all very annoying. I do not like how judgmental this red squiggle is. And now we have fixed that. As you can see, const FDC3 does not have any red squiggles. That's because Finos's library, the get agent library, is supporting all of the TypeScript definitions, all the information you could want, everything that will make your automated test cases, your normal TypeScript builds, everything much, much happier. So that alone is exciting for me. But also, this works whether you're on the desktop or a browser. We're going to show that to you later. But beforehand, you could work within a desktop, but you'd have to add all of this extra stuff to work on a browser. And if you wanted to work on a browser, that could be one of multiple different possible vendors. If you were an application that wanted to work for a variety of different firms, you would have to do a bunch of juggling to try to guess what platform you're on and how to support it. Now, all of that's taken away. All of that is handled by the @finos/FDC3 library. And so all I have to do is call await get agent. I can also run this in a browser by itself if we go back to this environment, and then it just doesn't, it just knows that there's no desktop agent and it just stops. It's fine. So going back to the sandbox, here we have await get agent, and then what other kinds of FDC3 tasks can we do? I have everything just held in one little function just for my own maintainability. And here we can see once you have that FDC3 object, I can call things like joining a user channel, or I can broadcast I can broadcast the context. So that means every application on the same color channel will all get that same piece of information when I broadcast. I can raise an intent, which is what we saw before that brought up the intent resolver. And that says this one application has information and I want exactly one other application to receive that information. I can also listen for broadcasts on my channel, and I can listen for intents. So I can listen for that one particular piece of information and say, I am an application that can receive, you know, that view chart intent, that view news intent, etc. So this is all you have to do. If you want to enable FDC3, you call await get agent, and then you can do FDC3.broadcast. You can do FDC3.raise intent, and it's just these couple of lines of code, and now you've suddenly unlocked that kind of power. So once you've sat down and said, this is what I want to do, this is the kind of code I want to write, how do you actually make sure it works? One of the powerful things about it is having one application work with another application. So sometimes that means you need that other application. In order to get working with that, let me show you the FDC3 workbench. This is also provided by Fenos. Fenos provides a lot of the tools necessary to get up and running with this. And so it's really exciting to see this and work on it. I'm opening here the FDC3 workbench because this can serve as my other secondary application that I can integrate with AG Grid or whatever existing complicated application you are working with. So here I can just go ahead and try out some contexts. I'm going to go to my user channel, and I want to make sure both of these applications are on the same color channel. I can use the widget that we provide for the sandbox, and I'm just going to select the first channel. And then over here in the workbench, I need to make sure that I'm in the same channel. So I'm just going to select the first one and join it. This just means they're both on the same channel, which means when one of them broadcasts a context, the other should be able to receive it, assuming they both have wired up .broadcast and .add context listener. I am going to say instrument. That's what we're talking about. I'm going to listen to it here on the workbench, and then I'm going to click ADI, and we can see instantly that the ADI context was immediately received by the workbench. And so I can just go through and click anything I want, and workbench is going to keep updating over and over again with all of those contexts that are coming through just live. I can also go the other way around. I can say I want to broadcast from the workbench the Apple instrument. And then as soon as I do that, Grid, since it's also on that same channel, receives that context and then updates based on that. Let's go ahead and clear that and see what we can also do with intents. So under intents, I can raise an intent here by double clicking Bitcoin. And now it'll tell me what all of the options do I want to send. It does not have the workbench in here because I did not register an intent listener. Good point. I should do that. I'm just going to bring up a chart. I love charts. It's so fun. Let's actually register an intent listener now. Will you do this every single time you develop an application? Absolutely you will. Forget to register these. Add listener. And now, let's try that again. And now it says you can open it in the FDC3 workbench. Great. And there we go. That's our intent for BP. I can also raise the intent if I have not already done that, Microsoft. And I'm going to raise a view chart intent, and I'm going to raise that. And it's going to say, I can go to charts, or I can go to this imported grid that I've added. And there we go. We have updated Microsoft. So those are the basic methods, the basic actions that you're going to be taking whenever you work with FDC3. You're either going to have a context broadcast across a color channel. So that's either broadcasting the context or listening for that context. Or you'll have an intent of the one-to-one kind of information. And so you're either going to raise that intent or you're going to be listening for that intent. And this is pretty much all of the actions that you really need to do with FDC3. And it all comes down to just await get agent and then call those methods off of the FDC3 object you receive, and it'll work across the board, desktop or browser. So with that, I'm going to send it back to you, Leslie.
Thank you. I was busy typing a message and some of the answers to some of the questions. So thank you. Yeah, good point. Why don't I share my thing? Sorry about that. We did practice these transitions. It's just that I wasn't paying attention. So thank you very much, Juliana. That was a nice demo of what you need for FDC3 for the web, which is almost nothing, rather than the old style stuff about choosing your platform, and also showing a little bit about functionality in our FDC3 sandbox. And as we said, if you're interested in using FDC3 sandbox, then send us a note and we can arrange access for it. So just a couple of things I wanted to bring up. First of all, there's Finos has an active community. If you look at this website, you'll see a lot of companies, including many of your own companies people who joined here, are members, and they run a load of different projects, including FDC3, and they also run these in-person events, so open source in finance forums. So the next one is coming up in London, 24th of June. We have a booth there, so if you want, and Juliana will be over and other people. So really interesting way to kind of see, and we're giving a presentation, really interesting way to see what's going on in the thing, meet other developers. And then they run the same style of event in New York in October. So I thoroughly recommend going to either of those events to get a real feel for what's going on. We have our own in-person event in London coming up at the end of this month, which we call the Interop.io Client Forum. The main focus is actually our clients talking about their experience with our products and their experience with Interop, the problems they've had, the successes they've had, the strategies they've used to deliver. Really, really interesting event. Finos are running an FTC3 panel at our event. So if you want a chance to meet Rob or Chris West, yeah, all Matt, and Juliana, then get in touch with us. But they're also really informative sessions from some of our clients, JP Morgan, Citi. You can read them, Redburn, Best Bets. I'm also going to have a couple of partners there, State Street, Finos again, Broadridge, Three Forge, who will be able to show and give you a chance to talk to them about how they work with Interop and FTC3. And again, we'll send you a link if you're interested in joining us in a few weeks' time. We're also, and this is the first time we've done this, we've run 4 previous client forums. So we're also bringing along a number of our product engineers. If you have specific questions you want to ask, speak to Juliana about FTC3, you can book events, you can book one-to-one sessions with them. Maybe you want to speak to Colin, who's in charge of the io.Connect browser team, or Stas, who does a lot of the .NET and integration to various projects. So again, another reason to come to the client forum. I think you find it a very useful way to kind of get up to speed and ask questions. So yeah, check your inbox. We'll be sending probably tomorrow morning an email with the URL for the project, recording for this webinar, information about client forums and stuff like that. And we'd also ask for you to follow us on LinkedIn. It does make a difference. And so, yeah, thank you very much. So moving on to the Q&A, which has got busier. I was trying, as Juliana was demoing, to answer a couple of questions. I won't go for too long, but what was the production ready code that the FTC3 team published? It is the actual JavaScript library that Juliana showed, which is the FTC3 for the web, and it has a special protocol to talk to, well, first of all, to check if FTC3 is there, and then have a protocol to talk to browser-hosted environments like ours that implement it. Great question about, I've got an intent resolver. Where does it come from? Well, it's part of the desktop environment. So on io.Connect, you can provide your own, but we provide a default one. And then where's the window displayed? Well, there's a lot of configuration there. Do you want to reuse the window you last used? Do you want to show a new one? Do you want it to pop up as a top level? Do you want it to appear within the workspace? All that kind of stuff is configurable and you've got some control over it. But that actually varies from desktop agent to desktop agent. So those are some of the questions that I managed to type answers to. We've got a couple of other questions about, does the Interop.io encapsulate the FTC3 implementation, or is it entirely different? We have a wider API for different forms of request response and interop. So we have request response with different parameter lists, whereas an FTC3 intent takes a single JSON structure. We have streaming requests and broadcast events and stuff like that. But you can access any FTC3 functionality through the Interop.io thing, and also if you're using the Interop.io, as long as you mark your methods to say this is an FTC3 intent, then it can be called using the FTC3 API. So the FTC3 API is supported as a first-class citizen, along with the Interop.io, the Finsomble API, the Blue42 API, and stuff like that. So yeah. Really, somebody has asked a question about IDs and symbology mapping and stuff like that. Do you have recommendations of which app has the responsibility to translate? Yeah, if you're it's a complicated question, and it
Mhm.
depends who owns the reference data. So if you're an application vendor,
Mhm.
you have a problem because you probably don't have a golden source reference data implementation. If you're an organization that has your reference data implementation, and I've seen some smaller organizations where it's just a big spreadsheet, then we have a product that sits in the background, and anybody who updates a context with an instrument type, we go and say, do we know any of the other symbol names? And that happens automatically in the background.
Mhm.
But it very much depends on what's happening.
And one of the other things that you can do is the FDC3 standard, especially around the instrument type, supports a variety of different IDs. So while if you do have your own internal ID that no one else knows about, that is a separate question, but it supports QSIP, it supports Figgy, it supports all kinds of different standards for for how you want to reference a particular instrument. So you may have access or have some kind of translation that works in that more standard compliant way that could work with all of the different applications. That said, you do want to make sure that any application that is receiving your context, whether it's through broadcasting a context or raising an intent, any application that receives that context would need to be able to understand the symbol that you are providing. So if you want to build an application that can go to anything and work with anyone out there, I suppose that does mean that the application doing that broadcast or that raising would need to do that translation ahead of time. But if you are confident that every application that could possibly ever be receiving it will understand what that symbol or what that ID means, then that gives you your answer. That you've already provided enough for anyone that could receive it to work with. So it's up to your particular use case.
Um, there's a great question here from Hans Wang, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, about what happens if you have FTC3 apps and they're running in different environments. So we have a browser and we have a desktop piece. We have standalone native Windows. We're also seeing some vendors publish their own, create their own, deliver their own FTC3 compatible environments. I won't use any names because I don't know if they've been publicly announced. And really, can they all interconnect together? And the answer is yes, with a bit of a caveat, which is it's about desktop agent bridging, which is, I think, a big focus for FTC3 for this year. Certainly, if you're using io.Connect desktop and io.Connect browser on different machines, we have products that let those things connect together. And that's being expanded so that any compliant FTC3 agents will allow that to happen. So the answer is yes, depending on what environments are running, but there's no reason they shouldn't do that. So somebody's asked, what are the key considerations when integrating FTC with the web in an environment that already uses OpenFin on another container? I won't talk for OpenFin. FTC3 for the web is an optional part of the FTC3 standard. So I'm not sure who will support it and when they'll do it. I can't really talk to that, but
We
you can
support
also
it.
we support it, yeah, in both our desktop and browser things. And so I won't talk for anybody else, but and bridging is another possibility. If you've got something that's bound to a particular agent, you can maybe look at the bridging capabilities that I was talking about in the previous answer.
Mhm. And so if you're working with a different container other than us, then I suppose you'd have to reach out to them and ask if they support FTC3 for the web. Hopefully they do. I know that if you were previously using io.Connect browser, such as the sandbox that we showed, and you wanted FTC3 to be supported on the web, you'd have to use our built-in libraries. And there's a couple of configurations you'd have to put in. And now you don't need that code anymore. You can replace it with the Git agent code and it can streamline things. And then any other container that supports FTC3 for the web should also be able to use it just fine. However, I don't know what our competitors support, so you'll have to ask them, I guess.
Juliana, here's a question for you. How does
Hmm.
FTC3 ensure backward compatibility with
With previous.
previous?
Hmm.
Yeah. What's
So
wrong?
one of the biggest things is that they do semantic versioning. So you can have a lot of confidence that anything that we're currently in the 2.x line, so you can have a lot of confidence anything in the 2.x line has backwards compatibility because we're just adding new features when you go from 2.1 to 2.2 to 2.3. Further Beyond that, I believe the biggest change between the 1.x and the 2.x line was kind of for desktop agents to worry about. I can't comment if you did 1.2, FDC3 1.2, does that still work on 2. In 2.2? I believe it does. I've never encountered any problems for moving over, and the only problems I've ever seen were related to desktop agent support. So that's all on us and not on you guys. So that's one of the biggest confidences you can have, just the support of semantic versioning, and that the and Finos cares a lot about making sure that we have as stable an environment as possible. Beyond that, I suppose if you absolutely needed to test it, I'm always in support of QA, but we support any of the different features you've written in the past. And then whenever we add things like a raise intent, the raise intent method originally just said it would raise it to whoever, and then later added the ability to add an optional parameter to say, I want to raise this intent and I want it to specifically go to this one particular application. So if you had already written raise intent for just like, I want to send out this context to whoever can take it, and that doesn't change. That still works. That's still viable. You just now have additional options available to you to add to your code, but it's not breaking anything that previously existed. Just not breaking anything that previously existed is an incredibly important part of our feature, and it takes up a lot of conversations we have during the standards. So I would have a lot of confidence that we're not going to break things moving forward because it's important to us.
But it's also important, I think you said, oh, Finos and FDC3 cares enormously about compatibility and backward compatibility. But of course, Finos and FDC3 don't really exist in any meaningful sense. What I think you mean is you and the other maintainers and the people who participate in the community all care a lot because you're using this code for your day jobs for that. So it's not like,
Absolutely.
what does FDC3 do to you? Yeah.
No one in these meetings is not also using it. That is why we care. And so we also don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. So we also don't want to shoot you in the foot.
There's a nice question here about can application adapters for non-FDC3 compliant applications like Bloomberg work with FDC3 intents? And the answer is yes, and let me caveat it slightly. So I've been told unofficially, no idea if it's true, that Bloomberg have not been keen about participating themselves in FTC3 because of its early connection to Symfony. No idea if that's true. There was alcohol present when I was told this story, so your mileage may vary. But in particular, when you interop io.Connect, we have a load of adapters to different things, including Bloomberg in its various forms. The terminal connect adapter, market data, that kind of stuff. And yes, we make FTC3, we provide FTC3 methods that we translate in our Bloomberg connector to the appropriate Launchpad updates and stuff like that. So yeah, you can launch Bloomberg Windows and you can set Launchpad group IDs using FTC3 methods using our tool, but that's part of the particular environment that you use. You get it on io.Connect. You may or may not get it in other things. So yeah, that's done. Someone said, do I want to compare interop.io and OpenFin? Yes, but not in public and not without alcohol being involved. So I think we'll skip that one. And of course, alcohol is, forget that. I'm not going there.
People should come to client forum, is what you're saying.
Yeah. There's a question about FTC3 agent bridging and how it facilitates interoperability between different desktop agents. The key bit is, with bridging implemented well, you don't really care which environment the application is running in. It just can participate. You can share color channels, you can share a method, you can open something on one, you can raise an intent from an app running in one environment and it will be answered by another environment, or in a trading environment, you might have 2 or 3 different desktops and they can cross over. You need to think about security. So security, again, is a big, like user identification, app identities is a big open question for this year. There's a working group that is looking at it. And so the pitfall, I think, around agent bridging is about, if you're implementing security and identity and authentication, then you may have issues moving from one environment to another. Either you can make it, but there's no authentication, or the authentication may not be compatible. So that's probably the biggest bridge. But if you're mainly doing internal apps on your own desktops, then the bridging just works, certainly in our products. Is there a public API standard for bridging non-FDC3 compliant apps? No, it's up to each desktop agent to provide their adapters and whether they choose to provide an FTC3 environment, intents, or share FTC3 data context. There's no public standard for it. It's just, I mean, I guess the public standard is the FTC3 data context. And so each of us delivering an FTC3 environment need to conform to the FTC3 standard. And that's what makes it so interesting.
I really love this question here. What are some interesting real world use case or client implementations you've seen in practice? One of my favorite things that I saw at the client forum in New York was some work with AI. So I had never really thought about how you can effectively automate a lot of workflows because using FTC3, it is just sending a little bit of JSON back and forth to different applications. And so seeing some people say that they want to, like, they ask their AI agent something about a client, and then that fires a broadcast to say, okay, all the applications, let's talk about this new client, and let's open these different applications that are all relevant to that client. And then suddenly you have all kinds of things pop up and all of your portfolio is visible, all with just the power of an AI agent, and then driving the rest of your desktop using FTC3. I'd never really thought about that, and it's so exciting to see FTC3 as a standard mature to the point that things we never even envisioned are becoming available, and that we were there, that was all ready to be captured as soon as like the AI advent has been coming out. So that's the thing that I'm most interested in and that I found most exciting.
We're coming up to the end of the webinar, but just a few things I want to squeeze in. We will be talking about AI at and our support for agentic AI at the client forum and announcing it afterwards. There's a question here about, is the browser sandbox open source? No. How does it work? It's effectively a hosted website. Yes, we encourage clients who want to support it internally. And we also offer our own AWS hosted environments as well. So I guess maybe the final question to answer is, what's the first thing I should do to get started with FTC3 for the web? And Juliana, I'll go over to you for that.
I mean, the way I would get started is I get access to our sandbox, and then you can use the demo URL that we've had, or otherwise take your own application, and then just go ahead, install the @fino/FTC3 and call await get agent, and then just start playing around and seeing what you can do with it and what would be having fun. So that's me personally.
And I think that talks about thing. I personally would look at the FTC3 site. I would see that the team of which you're part have spent a lot of time creating FTC3 training courses, and I would go and do some of the training courses to get a background to FTC3 and maybe become an FTC3 certified programmer if I went back to being a programmer, or software engineer as we call them now. So
it's up to everyone which kind of personality you have.
Yeah, and look, I'm wearing a shirt, so you know I'm the person who's going to do the training course, right? I just want to answer this one. I know we're slightly over time, and so you'll see it in the recording if you have to drop now. But this is about saying, hang on, how can you possibly use FTC3 with Teams? Would Microsoft have to support FTC3? Well, Microsoft have joined the FINOS consortium, but they don't support FTC3. And that's where vendors like ourselves take part. So in our Teams adapter, as with our Bloomberg adapter, we will work with the APIs that Microsoft supports, GraphQL for Teams and stuff. And we will, in our adapter, provide appropriate FTC3 intents and data contexts so that those applications using the FTC3 APIs will automatically be able to work with Teams through our adapter. And that's what FTC3 is meant to be, a lingua franca that lets applications talk without prior negotiation. And it's up to us to work that little bit harder to make sure that you don't see the different APIs involved from the different platforms. And will we include links to the training in our email? Yes, we definitely will. And Terry, and I'm glad to see that you're taking my approach to these things and make use of the training material that's available. I think that's all we've got time for, except one final thing. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This is the first technical webinar we've done in a long time. One of my goals for Interop.io this year is to build a more formal community. And I'd be really interested in any suggestions you might have about what else you might like us to run a webinar on, either particular features about products or something else about UX designs, launchpad stuff, whatever might be interesting. We're really looking to run a series of these through this year, and be really great to understand what you might be interested in. So thank you all again for coming along. You will get the emails with the links, including the training material. So yeah, thank you very much, and see you at the next one, or our client forum, or at the Finos Open Source Forum in London. Thanks. Bye-bye.